The reports come in at all hours, but the ones that matter arrive between 11 at night and 4 in the morning. That is when the grid breathes differently. That is what one of the senior analysts told me during my first week, and I did not know what he meant until I had been doing this job long enough to feel it myself. That particular quality of late-night electrical silence, the way the data streams thin out after the residential peak hours, the way outage clusters begin to look almost deliberate when you stare at them long enough in the dark. He retired 8 months after I joined. I do not think it was a coincidence. I think he had felt it for too long. My name is not important. What I do is, I sit in front of 3 monitors in an office that used to be a storage room inside a building. That used to be a regional energy substation inside a utility management company that processes outage data for 4 counties and 2 municipalities across a stretch of the mid-Atlantic coast that most people drive through without stopping. I receive the reports. I log them. I cross-reference them against the grid maps, against the maintenance schedules, against the historical outage records that go back to 1987 in physical binders and 1994 in the database. I flag anomalies. I escalate genuine emergencies to the on-call field crews. I write summary notes at the end of each shift. I do this 4 nights a week, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I have been doing it for just under 3 years. The office is always cold. I have asked about this. Facility says the HVAC in this part of the building runs on a separate thermostat that was misconfigured during a renovation in 2019, and the fix was never prioritized because nobody wanted to spend the money. I have a space heater under my desk that trips the circuit if I run it above its lowest setting. I wear a fleece most nights. On particularly bad nights, I wear 2. The monitors put out enough light to read by, but not enough to feel awake by. There is a difference. You can be technically capable of reading and still feel like you are slowly going blind in some cellular sense, like the part of you that processes meaning is dimming even as the part of you that processes symbols remains functional. 3 years of overnight shifts has taught me the geography of that particular interior twilight. I know where it begins. I know how it progresses. I know that around 2:30 in the morning, in the dead center of the shift, there is a window of approximately 40 minutes where everything I read looks slightly translated, like text that has been run through another language and back and is almost but not perfectly correct. I mention this because it matters. I want you to understand the conditions under which I noticed what I noticed. I want you to understand that I am not someone prone to imagination or embellishment. I process data. I flag anomalies. I write summary notes. That is the whole of what I am, professionally speaking. And by 3 years in, it had begun to feel like the whole of what I was in every other sense too. I want you to understand that before I tell you about Dunmore Hollow was a residential subdivision approximately 11 miles southeast of the city center in the older, lower-lying part of the county where the roads are still named after the families who farmed them 140 years ago. Dutch colonial architecture mostly, brick and aluminum-sided split levels from the 60s and 70s, the kind of neighborhood that looks in old photographs like it was always slightly tired, like it had been built by people who were doing their best, but knew it probably wouldn't last. It did not last. The neighborhood was condemned following a combination of factors that accumulated over roughly a decade. A subsidence problem in the underlying geology, a drainage failure that resulted in 3 consecutive years of significant flood damage to the lowest lying streets, and a contamination issue in the groundwater that the county health department classified as significant enough to warrant relocation assistance, but not significant enough to appear prominently in news coverage. The last residents were bought out and relocated between 2014 and 2016. The structures were demolished in a phased process that concluded in the spring of 2017. There is nothing there now. I looked it up using satellite imagery when this first started. There is a flat, overgrown field, some concrete slab remnants visible through the grass, and what appears to be the ghost of a cul-de-sac, still faintly readable in the vegetation pattern. There is nothing there. I need you to hold that, because in our outage reporting system, Dunmore Hollow, specifically the grid node designated RES7741DH, which served the subdivision's 214 residential addresses, generates an outage report every single night. I did not notice it for the first several months. This is the thing about data work at this volume. You develop filters, not consciously but structurally, built into the way your eyes move across the screen. You learn what normal looks like. You learn what the shape of a genuine emergency looks like. And you learn, above all, to trust the system's own automated flagging rather than doing the cognitive work of reading every line yourself. Because reading every line yourself is not possible across a full shift, and the system is supposed to catch what matters. RES7741DH was not flagged by the system. That is the first thing. It came through as a routine, low-priority outage event, the kind that generates a log entry and a timestamp and nothing else, the kind that clears itself before morning because there is no infrastructure left to actually repair, and so the system logs the loss, and then, when the phantom signal drops off, logs the restoration. Clean, automated, invisible, unless you were looking for it specifically. I was not looking for it. I was looking at a genuine transformer fault in the industrial park on the north side, which had knocked out power to about 1,200 addresses and required 2 field crews and a significant amount of paperwork. It was a complicated night. RES7741DH was one line among hundreds. What made me notice it was, eventually, boredom, or something adjacent to boredom. That 3 a.m. condition where the active incidents have been handled and the reports are coming in at their slowest rate, and there is nothing urgent left to do, but you cannot leave and you cannot truly rest. And so your attention begins to drift across the data in an unfocused way, like light through dirty glass, landing on things not because they are important, but because they are there. I was doing that kind of drifting sometime in early October when I noticed that the same grid node appeared in the log from the previous night. And then, out of something that was not quite curiosity but was curiosity adjacent, I went back further. And there it was in the night before that. And the night before that, I went back 30 days. RES7741DH had generated an outage report every single night for the entire 30 days of my sample. I sat with that for a moment. I looked at the timestamp column. Every outage began at 2:47 a.m. Every single one, same node, same time, 30 consecutive nights. The first thing I did was what any reasonable person would do. I assumed the explanation was mundane. Equipment ghosts are a real phenomenon in utility data systems, legacy sensors that were never properly decommissioned, firmware loops that generate phantom events, network nodes that ping the system with corrupted data because nobody ever officially removed them from the grid topology. The grid is an old system. The county's infrastructure layer is older still. There are nodes in our database that reference equipment that has not physically existed for 15 or 20 years, kept alive by nothing more than a record nobody ever got around to deleting. I wrote a note in my shift log, RES7741DH generating. Nightly phantom outage events, likely legacy sensor artifact from decommissioned Dunmore Hollow residential grid. Recommend topology audit to remove from active monitoring. I tagged it for the daytime infrastructure team and moved on. This is what I want to be clear about. I did the right thing. I noticed, I documented, I escalated through the appropriate channel. That is the job. That is what I am supposed to do. The infrastructure team closed the ticket without action in 4 days. The note in the closure said, known legacy artifact, not flagged for removal per county records retention protocol. No action required. And the reports kept coming. I want to pause here and tell you something about what it does to a person to work this job for 3 years, not to complain. I am not complaining. I am trying to give you the accurate interior conditions because without them, the rest of this will not make sense. By the time I noticed Dunmore Hollow, I had processed somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 individual shift reports. I had handled, directly or indirectly, every kind of outage event that occurs in a mid-Atlantic county. Ice storms, heat surges, equipment failures, car accidents that take out distribution poles, squirrel-related transformer incidents which are more common than most people know, flooding, human error, contractor damage, copper theft, substation fires. I had learned the rhythms of the grid in the way that you can only learn something by sitting with it in the dark for long enough that you stop being separate from it. What I am saying is that I had become, in some clinical sense, quite good at recognizing when something was wrong. Not because I was brilliant, because I was exhausted and attentive, which is a combination that produces a particular kind of low-grade perception, like a headache that turns out to be vision. You feel things before you understand them. You know something is off about a data set before you can articulate why. I knew in October, when I first noticed the Dunmore Hollow pattern, that the infrastructure team's closure was wrong, not the factual part. Yes, it was almost certainly a legacy sensor artifact. Not the procedural part. Yes, the county records retention protocol probably did exempt it from cleanup. I believed all of that. What I did not believe was that it was fine. It did not feel fine. And the thing about working alone overnight for 3 years is that you learn to take your feelings seriously in the absence of anyone to consult with, because there is no one to consult with. There is just you and the monitors and the fluorescent hum of the light tube that maintenance has been meaning to replace for 6 months. There is just you and the data and the thing that the data is not quite saying. I started logging Dunmore Hollow separately. My own log, a spreadsheet on my personal drive, not the company system. Every night I noted the timestamp, the duration, the signal characteristics, and anything adjacent in the data that seemed worth recording. October became November. The outage, every night at 2:47 a.m., every single night. Part 2, the record in the second week of November. I found the first inconsistency. I had been cross-referencing the Dunmore Hollow outages against the county's historical infrastructure records, not because this was part of my job, but because the alternative was sitting in the cold, reading the same stream of routine events until 6 a.m., which was what my job technically required, but which had become, in the specific context of whatever was happening with RES 7741DH, insufficient. I needed something to do with the feeling. Documenting it seemed like the responsible version of that. The county infrastructure records are digitized back to 1994 and archived in a read-only database that our system interfaces with for historical reference. They are comprehensive and deeply boring, the kind of records that exist because someone decided they should exist and nobody has ever argued otherwise. They include grid topology, installation dates, maintenance logs, capacity ratings, and, relevant to my situation, decommissioning records for nodes that were removed from service. Dunmore Hollow's residential grid had a decommissioning record dated April 2017, which tracked with the demolition timeline. The record listed the primary distribution node, 3 secondary nodes, and 14 endpoint sensors as having been removed from service. It was signed off by a county infrastructure supervisor whose name I will not include here, though I have it. It looked complete and official, but RES 7741DH was not on the list. I checked 3 times. I expanded my search parameters. I looked for alternate node identifiers that might correspond to the same physical equipment under a different designation. I went through the entire decommissioning record line by line. RES 7741DH, the specific node that was generating nightly outage reports, was not included in the Dunmore Hollow decommissioning package. This was the mundane explanation, finally. It had been missed. Someone in 2017 had failed to include it in the removal list, which meant it had never been formally decommissioned, which meant the system had spent 9 years dutifully logging its phantom signals because as far as the database was concerned, it was still an active node attached to active infrastructure. That was the explanation. I documented it. I wrote it up and resubmitted it to the infrastructure team with the specific record gap identified and a recommendation that the 2017 decommissioning file be amended and the node removed from the active topology. The ticket was closed again in 3 days. The closure note said, "Under review by County Records Office. No changes to be made to historical records pending review. No action required at this time." I wrote back and asked how long the review would take. Nobody answered. December arrived. The outages continued. 2:47 a.m. every night, with a consistency that had stopped feeling like a data artifact and had started feeling like something else. I don't have a better word for it than that. Something else. A quality of intention, maybe, though that is not a rational thing to attribute to a utility grid signal. I started looking at the duration data more carefully. Outages have a signature: the curve of the voltage drop, the rate of return, the total event window. These vary depending on cause. A tree online outage looks different from a transformer fault, looks different from a planned service interruption. I had processed enough of them that I could read the shape of an event the way a doctor reads a waveform. The Dunmore Hollow signal didn't look like any of them. The drop was too clean. Not the jagged sudden cliff of an equipment failure. Not the gradual slope of an overload. Clean like a switch. And the return signal, when it came, always around 3:15 a.m., was equally clean, like a switch thrown back. 28 minutes consistently, every night. I had worked with grid signals for 3 years. I had never seen anything cut and restore with that degree of consistency. Even planned outages, scheduled maintenance windows, load balancing events had natural variation. Biological variation, almost. The slight imprecision that comes from human hands throwing human switches. This was not imprecise. This was 28 minutes to the second. I checked the timing data against the raw logs, not the processed reports. The raw logs are more granular, and in the raw logs, the duration was not approximately 28 minutes. It was exactly 28 minutes, 1,680 seconds, every night, without deviation. I sat with that information for several minutes. I looked at the monitors. I looked at the raw numbers on my personal spreadsheet, 63 nights of data by then, 63 instances of 1,680 seconds. Then I put my coffee down and looked up Dunmore Hollow in a way I had not looked it up before. Not the infrastructure. Records, not the grid topology, not the county assessor's database. I looked up its history. The news archive search took me about 2 hours spread across several nights because I was not supposed to be doing personal research during shift hours, and I was being careful about it, checking when the data stream was slow, closing the browser whenever the queue had anything urgent. What I found came in pieces, in the way that local news coverage of anything that happened more than a decade ago comes in pieces. Fragments, follow-ups, the occasional retrospective that treats the event as atmosphere rather than information. There had been something in Dunmore Hollow before the subsidence, before the contamination, before the buyouts, something that the infrastructure timeline had not mentioned because it was not an infrastructure event. In 2009, there had been a fire, a house fire in the middle of the night on a street called Caldwell Branch Court in the lower residential section of the neighborhood in the floodplain area that would later be among the first properties condemned. The fire had started, according to the county fire marshal's report that I found in a digitized archive of local government documents at approximately 2:50 a.m. It had spread to 2 adjacent properties before units arrived. 3 people had died. A family, their names were in the news report. I read them. I will not write them here, but I read them. and I noted that the oldest person who died was 41 and the youngest was 7. I looked at the timestamp, 47 AM. Every night, the outage. 3 minutes before the fire started, I closed the browser. I looked at my monitors. I looked at the glow of the reports queue. I looked at the dark window in the corner of the office that shows the parking lot where my car sat alone under a yellow sodium light. I did not write this in my shift log. I did not write this anywhere official. I went home at 6 AM and I lay down without sleeping, and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about clean signals, about switches, about 28 minutes, about what was in that neighborhood, beneath the overgrown slabs, in the flat dark of an empty field at 2:47 in the morning. I thought about that for a long time. Part 3. The duration. January was the worst month I've had in this job, and I have had some months. Partly it was the weather. January in this region is a cruelty specific to the mid-Atlantic. Cold enough to be miserable, but not cold enough to be beautiful. An unrelenting gray that settles over everything and stays. Storm events, outage clusters, the heating load on the grid pushing everything toward its operational margins in a way that makes the data dense and urgent and relentless. I worked 5 nights some weeks, taking extra shifts when colleagues called out because the work needed doing and I was there, and also because being there in the cold office with the monitors and the queue had become more comfortable than being home. I do not want to examine that too closely. I will tell you only that it was true. Partly it was done more hollow. I had, by January, been tracking the node for almost 4 months. 97 nights of consistent data. And I had developed, in those months, a relationship with the data that I recognized, intellectually, as not quite healthy. I knew what time it would happen. I began, without meaning to, structuring my attention around 2:47 AM, finishing tasks before it, being at my desk, alert when the timestamp hit, watching the report populate in real time the way you watch a phone screen when you're waiting for a call from someone who worries you. This is the thing I want to be honest about. The routine had become meaningful to me in a way I could not fully explain. I had the facts, I had the history, I had the fire, I had the names. And every night, when the outage report populated at 2:47 AM, clean, consistent, 28 minutes, 1,780 seconds, I felt something that I can only describe as the specific grief of witnessing something that cannot be witnessed by anyone else. A private knowledge, a thing that kept happening to no audience. I watched it. That was what I did. I was the audience. In the second week of January, the duration changed. I almost missed it. It was a particularly heavy night. An ice event had knocked out power to about 6,000 residential addresses across 3 zones, and I was managing multiple field crew deployments simultaneously, running on my 3rd coffee and the particular nervous alertness that comes with genuine operational emergencies. The queue was dense. My attention was appropriately elsewhere, but I was at my desk at 2:47 because I am always at my desk at 2:47, and when the Dunmore Hollow report populated, I glanced at it the way you glance at something familiar. And I looked back at it, and I looked at it again. The outage duration field, which for 97 consecutive nights had populated with a value of 1,680 seconds, now read 1,709 seconds. 29 minutes and 29 seconds. Not 28 minutes. Not 1,680 seconds. Not the number that had been consistent, without deviation since the first night I started tracking it. I stared at that number for long enough that I missed a field crew check-in and had to call them back. I apologized. I logged the miss. I looked at the Dunmore Hollow data again. 709 seconds. I went back through my spreadsheet. 97 entries reading 1,680. One reading 1,709. I told myself it was variation. I told myself that after 4 months, of observing what was probably a legacy sensor glitch. I had developed such a fixation on the pattern that any deviation felt enormous, felt meaningful, when the rational explanation was simply that the signal had drifted slightly the way old electronic signals drift. Capacitor decay, impedance variation, any number of banal technical reasons. I told myself this for 3 nights. On the 4th night, the duration was 1,738 seconds. On the 5th night, it was 1,768, 29 seconds more each night. A consistent increment, a counting up. I sat in my chair in the cold office at 3:15 in the morning on the 5th night, and I thought, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that I was looking at something that knew it was being watched. I know that is not a rational thought. I am telling you anyway, because it is what I thought, and I promised myself when I started writing this down that I would be accurate. I researched the fire more thoroughly in February. I was more careful this time, more systematic, going back to primary sources rather than news summaries, the fire marshal's report, the county coroner's records, which are public documents available through a FOIA process I initiated in January, and which arrived in a manila envelope in early February. The building permit history for the specific address on Caldwell Branch Court. The coroner's report confirmed the 3 deaths. It also noted the times with the precision that official documents tend to have. The 911 call was received at 2:51 a.m. The fire was reported as active and spreading by the first arriving unit at 3:04 a.m., and the medical examiner's estimated time of death for all 3 individuals was consistent with the early stages of the fire, sometime between 2:50 and 3 a.m. The building permit history was less clinical and more strange. The house on Caldwell Branch Court had had its electrical system flagged for inspection twice in the 18 months preceding the fire. Both inspections had found code violations, outdated wiring, an overloaded panel, a junction box that the inspector's notes described as a fire risk. Both times the property had been given a remediation window. Neither remediation had been completed. There was a follow-up flag that should have triggered a compliance action, but the record showed the flag had been closed without explanation, not resolved, just closed, approximately 6 weeks before the fire. Someone had closed the flag. There was a staff ID number in the record, no name attached to it in the digitized system. I noted all of this in my personal spreadsheet. I did not know what I was building. I noted it anyway, the duration on the night. I read the coroner's report was 1,828 seconds, 30 minutes and 28 seconds, still counting up, toward something. I did not know toward what. Part 4. The signal in the 3rd week of February, the raw data changed, not the report. The report still populated the same way, same node, same timestamp, same counter-incrementing duration. But when I pulled the raw signal logs, which I had begun doing nightly, extracting the granular data beneath the processed report layer, I found something new. There is a field in the raw grid signal data called load profile. It is a technical descriptor that records the consumption signature of a node at the time of an event, essentially what the node was drawing from the grid before the outage hit. For a residential node, this should be residential. The particular harmonic signature of household appliances, HVAC systems, water heaters, the background drawer of electronics in standby. I had seen thousands of these. They all look essentially the same. The load profile for RES7741DH did not look the same. I am not an electrical engineer. I cannot give you a technical interpretation of what I was looking at. What I can tell you is that the profile was wrong. Too complex for an empty field, layered in a way that suggested multiple simultaneous loads, not the single circuit ghost signal I would expect from a legacy sensor, but something that looked, in the visualization tool I was using, like a full residential draw, like something in that field was using electricity. like something was drawing power through a node connected to infrastructure that had been demolished 9 years ago in a neighborhood where nothing stood, in a flat, overgrown field with concrete slab ghosts, and the faint phantom of a cul-de-sac visible from satellites. I sat with that for a very long time. I thought about the clean switch, about 2:47 a.m., about 3 minutes before the fire, about the flag that was closed without explanation, about 29 seconds added each night, counting towards something. I thought about what it means when a system keeps running after the thing it was built to serve is gone. What the system is serving instead. I did not have an answer. I do not have one now. But I knew, sitting in the cold office in the early hours of a February morning, that I was going to keep watching, not because I had a professional obligation to. The infrastructure team had closed both tickets. The county was conducting a review that was never going to produce action. The system was technically operating within documented parameters. I had no obligation. I was going to keep watching because someone had to. Because the data was here, and I was here, and the thing in the data was still happening every night to no audience but me, and because the duration was at 1,187 seconds and still going up, and because I had the names from the coroner's report, and because the father had been an electrician. I want to be careful about the next part. I want to be precise. In the first week of March, I was pulling the raw signal log at 2:47 a.m. as I had been doing every night for weeks, when I noticed a second anomaly in the data adjacent to the Dunmore Hollow event. Not in the RES 7741DH record, in the records of the two surrounding grid nodes, legacy nodes serving adjacent areas of the decommissioned infrastructure, areas that had their own decommissioning records and which had never, in all my months of observation, generated any anomalous data. At 2:47 a.m., both adjacent nodes registered a microsecond voltage fluctuation. Not an outage, not an event that would generate a report. A flicker, essentially. The kind of thing that happens when load shifts suddenly in a connected system. The kind of thing that happens when a switch is thrown. Not a software artifact generating a phantom outage event. A physical switch. I stared at that data for a long time. My hands were very still on the keyboard. The fluorescent light above me buzzed. The building's heating system ticked. It was 3:09 in the morning, and I was entirely alone. I pulled 3 months of raw logs for both adjacent nodes. The fluctuation was there every night, always at 2:47 a.m., always lasting exactly as long as the Dunmore Hollow outage, always resolving. At the exact moment the Dunmore Hollow signal returned. Someone was physically switching the power off, in a field, at 2:47 in the morning, every single night for longer than I had been watching. Part 5. Witness did not go there. I want to be clear about this. I thought about it. I thought about it for most of March, the idea of driving out on a weeknight, parking on the road at the edge of the old neighborhood, sitting in the dark at 2:44 a.m. and watching a flat, overgrown field. I thought about what I would see. I thought about what I would not see. I thought about the satellite images and the concrete slab ghosts and the faint ghost of the cul-de-sac. I did not go. Partly because I'm not the kind of person who goes. Partly because I had by then a very clear sense that knowing more was not going to make anything better, and that the specific kind of not better it would make things was the kind I was not equipped to come back from whole. There are limits to witnessing. I had found mine. What I did instead was write everything up, properly, completely, with the timeline and the duration data and the load profile analysis and the adjacent node fluctuation records and the fire marshal report and the coroner's records and the permit flag closure, and I submitted it. Not to the infrastructure team. I had learned what happened there. I submitted it to the Regional Grid Operations Director with a copy to the County Utilities Oversight Office and a copy to the Regional Records Compliance Coordinator and a copy, for reasons I am still not entirely sure about, to the County Health Department, which had overseen the original contamination response that precipitated the neighborhood's demolition. I sent the submission on a Thursday evening before my shift began from a personal email account. I received responses from 3 of the 4 recipients by the following Monday. The Grid Operations Director's response thanked me for my diligence, noted that the anomalous data had been reviewed by the technical team, and confirmed that the signals in question were consistent with known behaviors of legacy infrastructure nodes in decommissioned service areas. No further action was planned. The Utilities Oversight Office responded with a form letter acknowledging receipt of my correspondence and informing me that all utility anomaly reports should be submitted through the standard service request portal. The Records Compliance Coordinator responded personally, which surprised me. A short note. It said, "Thank you for forwarding this. I will look into the 2017 decommissioning record. These things sometimes have gaps." Nothing else. The County Health Department did not respond at all. The duration reached 3,600 seconds in the second week of April. 60 minutes. A full hour. It had started at 28 minutes. It had been counting up at 29 seconds per night for 71 nights. And now it was an hour, and the rate of increment had not changed, and I could do the arithmetic well enough to know where it was going. The fire had burned for approximately 4 hours before it was fully controlled. 10 minutes. 400 seconds. At 29 seconds per night, it would take until sometime in December to reach that number, and I did not know if that was a meaningful calculation or a delusion I had constructed out of grief and sleep deprivation and 4 months of staring at a signal in the dark. Both things can be true, maybe, that it means something, and that I have also lost some degree of objectivity. I am not certain those are mutually exclusive. The Records Compliance Coordinator emailed again in mid-April. Just one line. I found the staff ID from the permit closure. Person retired in 2011. Happy to share the name if relevant. I wrote back and said yes, it was relevant. She shared the name. I will not put it here. I will tell you only that I recognized it, not personally, but structurally. It was the same family name as one of the 3 people in the coroner's report. I sat in the cold office for a long time after reading that. The fluorescent light buzzed. Above me, the queue populated with routine events. At 2:47 a.m., the Dunmore Hollow report appeared. I watched it populate. I watched the duration field. 629 seconds. One more night added. Epilogue. Still reporting. It is July now. I am writing this during the slow hours of a Tuesday overnight in the cold office under the fluorescent light that has still not been replaced. The space heater is on its lowest setting. My second coffee is going cold. The outage reports from Dunmore Hollow continue every night. The duration is at 8,241 seconds now, which is 2 hours and 17 minutes and 41 seconds, which is almost exactly the point at which, according to the fire marshal's report, the fire reached its maximum intensity on the night of January 14, 2009. I do not know what happens when it reaches 14,400. I have made my peace with not knowing, in the sense that I have made peace with the fact that I cannot make peace with it. It is an ongoing condition. I carry it the way you carry anything that you cannot put down and cannot explain and cannot share with anyone who hasn't sat in the dark long enough to feel what you feel. The Records Compliance Coordinator and I have exchanged a few more emails. She found the gap in the decommissioning record. She filed the amendment. The county has not approved it. She says it is sitting in a review queue and she doesn't know when it will be cleared. RES 7741DH is still in our active topology. It is still generating nightly reports. It is still flagged as a known legacy artifact. No action required. I have stopped submitting tickets about it. Not because I stopped believing it matters, because I understood, somewhere in April, that the institution knows, not necessarily the specific facts, the timing, the fire, the permit flag, the name, but the existence of it. The existence of the thing in the data that shouldn't be there, that they have categorized as manageable, that they have filed appropriately and set aside and decided they can live with. The institution can live with most things if the paperwork is in order. I think about the electrician sometimes, about what it means to spend a career working on the infrastructure that failed to protect your own house, about the flag that was closed without explanation, about whether he knew, about whether it matters now whether he knew. I think about the 7-year-old. I sit at my desk, and the queue populates, and I process the reports, and I flag the anomalies, and I write the summary notes. And at 2:47 a.m., I am always at my desk, because that is when it happens. And because if it is going to keep happening, and it is going to keep happening, I am certain of that now. I have been certain for months. Then someone should be there. Someone should be watching. I am the audience. I am the only audience. The reports are still generating every night, without explanation, without resolution, without anyone in the institution finding this unusual enough to spend money on. It runs. The system runs. It has been running since before I started watching, and it will be running after I stop. I do not know when I will stop. At 2:47 a.m., the field in Dunmore Hollow goes dark, and I am here, and I watch it, and I write it down.